Aloha and welcome back to SUP FM. My name's Simon Hutchinson, and in the SUP FM podcast every week, I chat to people who can inspire and add to your experience of SUP. What you'll find in every episode is a conversation with someone who's either done something incredible in the sport or who can give you some knowledge, insights and help which will benefit you whenever you're on the water. This episode is sponsored by Starboard. Starboard has a reputation for constant innovation and development, and this is woven through their organisation, particularly their board and their paddle design. Starboard has always been behind stand-up paddling, and it continues to strongly support and develop the sport. They're strong innovators and produce quality products, but they're also relentlessly working to eliminate their carbon footprint through recycling bottles into bags and turning fishing nets into paddles, and are invested in planting mangrove trees, which are a highly effective way of fixing carbon. They were one of the world's first companies to calculate their plastic footprint and set up a plastic offset program, and they're working to become carbon past positive and balance not only their current carbon footprint, but their entire 25 years of business. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, through the link in the show notes. We hope that you're already following us on Instagram, which is where we spend most of our time, and also on Facebook. But you can keep it old school by signing up to our SUP FM email newsletter. And if you do sign up, then as a thank you, you'll also get our free guide to our favourite apps, which are the ones that we use on the water and which help us to keep safe and informed. And you can subscribe by heading over to our website, supfmpodcast.com. This week, I speak with Lizzi Larbalestier, environmentalist and executive coach, as we harvest her knowledge and her experience of protecting sea mammals and the ocean. And we find out about her role as an executive coach, using the water as a means to improve performance and mental health. We talk about the increasing number of encounters with ocean wildlife and what we can do as paddleboarders to reduce and to eliminate the serious harm we can unintentionally do to these beautiful animals. You may recognise Lizzi's name because she went viral this summer, where there was international coverage of her attempts to help a stranded and lost walrus called Wally recover, get fit and fat before he made his way back to the Arctic, which is where he should have been. Lizzi is also a leader in the coaching world, working with executives and Olympians. She's an expert in blue health, and she talks about the ocean and how it allows her to inspire others to change and to tap into their own blue minds. So there's lots to learn and enjoy in this chat with environmentalist and executive coach Lizzi Larbalestier. Hey Lizzi, welcome to SUP FM.
Thanks very much for having me on your show.
It's great to have you on. So where are you speaking to us from? Would it be anywhere near the water by any chance?
I think I'm about 800 metres from the water at the moment, so I'm in Perranporth in North Cornwall.
Fabulous. And Perranporth, of course, is familiar to a large amount of holiday makers in the UK. And for those outside, it kind of serves as a similar coastline to that featured in the series Poldark, isn't it? It's all beautiful rocky coasts and wonderful unspoilt coastlines.
Very definitely. I would say if you were US based, I'd think west coast of the US, so round between Santa Cruz and San Francisco, that sort of area. It's a rocky coastline with some amazing golden beaches on it and some lovely waves. So not necessarily always ideal for a very calm stand-up paddle, but it certainly is a beautiful beach.
Absolutely, and very familiar to those coastline communities of Monterey, where there's so much wildlife over there on the west coast of the US. Well, it's great to have you on because as a guest, you've got some serious experience across a couple of areas which are of direct interest for members of our growing SUP tribe. One is about blue mind and blue health, and your specialism about using the ocean and the water as a method to coach clients to achieve their well-formed life outcomes. And then there's something else that you've developed over the years, which is working with the British Divers Marine Life Rescue, where you've been there to provide help to wildlife. And it appears that there's no shortage of help that needs giving. But before we start, it would be great to find out about your outdoors background, and particularly your water and ocean background, because there's no question that water is an essential part of your life. When did you first notice a fascination with water?
So that's a great question, because that goes beyond memory, really. If you think we're all automatically and very wired to be connected with water, I think the first time that I consciously recognised quite how powerful water was for me was back in childhood, really. Like many people's childhoods during the 70s, it was a sketchy way to grow up. And I used to go to the beach and spend a lot of time at the beach as a very young child. My dad used to take us to the beach while he went off flying. He used to fly as his recreation. And we were kind of wild children, a little bit feral. And basically the beach was a place of solace and fun and play and exploring and curiosity. So since childhood, the beach has been very, very deeply something that comes through who I am, and connection with nature as part of that, because we'd go and explore the wildlife and the streams and rivers around the coastline of North Cornwall as children. So not necessarily professionally connected at that stage in life, but certainly right from childhood, water and the ocean were very, very important parts of my life.
And that sets out our passions in life. And we'll talk later on about the role that the water has on all of our lives, whether we realise it or not. But how do you interact with water at the moment? Obviously, you've mentioned that you're 800 yards from the beach. What's your delivery methods for getting out there into the water? Do you surf?
I used to surf, yeah. So I actually moved back down to Cornwall because I loved surfing. So I basically had a plan of how can I make my work be near the beach. So changed my job role deliberately to move to a place that was very near the coast. But how I use the water, or how I work with the water at the moment, certainly through professional avenues, is part of my work. But in terms of my lifestyle, I cold water swim, so I spend lots of time in the water. Cold water swimming right the way through the year, so that's not something that's just done in the summertime. I like hand planing, so I love body surfing and hand planing, so less of a stand-up surfer now, more of a hand planer. I like being in the water from that perspective. In terms of my on-the-water experiences, I have a stand-up paddleboard, so I stand-up paddle predominantly in calmer spaces, so I actually quite like stand-up paddling in a river location rather than a beach location, although we've got a few beaches on our south coast that are a little bit calmer. So I stand up paddle. I walk near the ocean, so I take my dog out for a walk near the ocean. So there's not really a day that I wouldn't see the sea, if you like. So it's very, very much part of lifestyle, and that's on a daily basis. So on a daily basis, pretty much I would be in the water at some point in time.
You tried SUP surfing?
I have not tried SUP surfing. No, I stand up paddle at quite an amateur level at this moment in time. I haven't. So, but I do like taking my dog out on my stand-up paddleboard. So she is, ironically, not hugely into water. She can swim, and she likes coming out on. We also have a kayak that we use for paddle for plastic. So we have a kayak which was gifted to us through Odyssey Innovation to go out paddling for marine plastics, and she comes on that, and she also comes on my stand-up paddleboard. But my level of skill on my stand-up paddleboard would not meet with her level of comfort sitting on a stand-up paddleboard with me in waves at this moment in time. The two would not merge well, I don't think.
Fair enough. There's always a learning process to all of this, and
certainly
your comfort levels increase. And you mentioned off-air that you had recently done a session with Red paddleboards. Just tell us a little bit about that and what you were talking about.
Yeah, so Red had a Red ride out. They're an awesome company. You're probably really aware of them. They have an owners club, and they're really focused on creating community and also looking at their sustainability. So it's a really good match to connect with Red from my perspective, because they're exploring, what do they do at end of life with paddleboards, that sort of thing, and how do they make their paddleboards really sustainable and last for a long time. So I went out as part of their Red ride out and basically chatted with their Red owners about blue health and more of the psychological benefits of connecting with water and some of the social benefits. So we were working with their SUP owners so that the SUP owners can be a bit more conscious of some of the benefits that they're gaining from their stand-up paddling and therefore amplify the impact of those.
And it's an interesting topic because there's often this debate about the high quality, the really resilient types of paddleboards versus the entry level ones or the cheaper value ones. And it's a similar debate in the clothing industry between sort of disposable fashions and organisations that really put the quality in, because it just means that it lasts that much longer. I guess that's always a concern, whichever industry you're considering in terms of environmental concerns.
I think so. And I think it is the environmental argument. You can always come up with the argument, buy cheap, buy twice. But it's essentially, for me, if I'm going to work with an organisation, there needs to be some conscience there around the environment and some questioning around things like the circular economy and what's actually happening at end of life with the product as you're at that design stage. So, yeah, it's a really lovely fit, and they're just good people. They're good people that really wants to encourage people to get out on the water and enjoy it and have conscience whilst they're doing that. So we've also been talking about the impact that we could have on wildlife as part of that, so that their owners are really aware of the wider systemic impact of them going out for their recreation time.
Brilliant. And that leads us rather neatly onto one of the two subjects that I really wanted to speak to you about, which is your role in terms of wildlife and the environment. And through talking about the work that you do, what I wanted to do is to share a bit more knowledge for our paddleboarders out there internationally about behaviour and the sort of ecosystems that they can see out there, which obviously is a great joy to us all, but also to make sure that we don't inadvertently and accidentally impact those populations. So before we get into the detail of that, I'm contractually obliged to ask you about this one, Lizzi. I'm sure you know what's coming, because I saw your name in the Times over the summer in a role that you've got as a volunteer for the British Divers Marine Life Rescue, where you provided some personal coaching services to what was probably the most challenging individual you delivered this to, which is a large 3-year-old walrus called Wally, who was lost and lying up on one of the Scilly Isles while recovering before he headed back up to the Arctic. Just tell us about that, because you were absolutely everywhere. And did you come up with any theories as to why he was so far away from home?
So I was called out to go to the Isles of Scilly, which they like to be called the Isles of Scilly rather than the Scilly Isles. Basically, as a volunteer for British Divers Marine Life Rescue, certainly my coaching skills were part of the communication around that, but that wasn't particularly while I was being called out. He was out there causing hassle, as most people are probably aware. It was very globally present in the media around the impact that he was having, upturning boats. Basically a lost walrus supposed to be living in the Arctic, and he'd found himself very, very far south. So my role was predominantly to observe his behaviour and to encourage people to accommodate him and to work out ways of accommodating him. So we worked with Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust, we worked with the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust, various other organisations like Natural England, the Marine Management Organisation, and IFCA, which is fisheries, to come up with a plan around how could we accommodate him. To basically discourage him from getting onto boats, and built a pontoon. So the story was in the media a lot. Essentially, we believe that he was in the wrong location because of climate change. We believe that we are likely to be getting a lot more of these larger animals displaced through to melting ice caps, for example. We're getting animals who are coming way, way out of their normal environments, so out of habitat species, for example. And my role was predominantly to allow him to get fit and fat to enable him to swim back home, which is easier said than done, because he was not getting the rest that he needed. Because even when we managed to provide a pontoon for him to be his safe rest space, people basically disturbed him pretty much 24/7. So one day I observed him get disturbed every 3 minutes. And that included people on small boats, basically circling his pontoon because they wanted to get their Instagram shot, their perfect selfie. And stand-up paddleboards as well. People on stand-up paddleboards literally taking their stand-up paddleboard within a foot of him, reaching out with selfie sticks and GoPros to pretty much touch him, to take photographs. Kayaks, every single watercraft you could imagine circled this pontoon and pretty much hounded this poor animal whilst he was trying to get his sleep and rest. And the biggest thing is, I think, education. I think people really didn't recognise that it was a big deal, him being disturbed. So he wasn't showing signs of aggression. They called him Wally. So because he'd been given a name, he was seen as this soft, cuddly animal once he'd stopped destroying things. Up until the point that he got his pontoon, he was feared and there was major panic and anger around boats being destroyed. But once he had his pontoon, everything shifted and it was like he was this tourist attraction and therefore to be observed and seen and marvelled at. So I think three different reasons he was getting disturbed. One was absolute fascination in his magnetism. So he was just far too beautiful that people couldn't control themselves and just decided to get too close to him for that reason. Second one, I think, is education. And we just don't know enough about these animals. We don't, in the UK, have large animals that we spend a lot of time around. So therefore, we're not wary enough of them. We don't really realise that even if he's not showing signs of aggression, if an 800-kilogram animal falls off that pontoon and you happen to be on your stand-up paddleboard next to him, that's not going to be a good ending for you or him. So education was a big element for us. And then the third element, which is not such a great one and not necessarily politically correct to say, but is entitlement. There were a number of people who were asked very nicely to not circle him and still just disregarded that advice. So protecting marine wildlife is really tricky when it comes to disturbance. We currently have a petition out to encourage laws around disturbance of grey seals, for example, because at the moment they aren't protected in relation to being disturbed. And if they are disturbed, if their sleep is disturbed, because they haul out to sleep, as does the walrus, and rest, if their sleep is disturbed, they don't get the energy that they require in order to thrive in life. So education and some form of statutory support is something that is massively needed for marine wildlife. So yes, my role out there was to keep the peace, but also enable him to get strong in order to enable him to move on, which he did. And he moved on to Ireland and then went off to Iceland. So he made a swim from Ireland to Iceland, which is around 900 miles in 22 days. So we know that he's up in the north and we presume that he's pretty much home now, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I saw those news reports. That's great to hear, and congratulations, because I know that was challenging. Because as you mentioned earlier on, you had to deal with the local anger and so on around it. But relating to that, we've had about 18 months of staycations, and coastlines have been particularly popular. Where you are in Cornwall is always very popular, but it's been the same all the way across the coastline of the UK. And I guess people have generally been holidaying in their country for obvious reasons. And holidaying near the sea has been great for our collective mental health. But as you mentioned, it hasn't been great for some of the larger aquatic wildlife. So it'd be great if we can have a bit more of a detailed chat about seals, because as a responsible tribe of paddleboarders, we want to ensure that we don't leave any trace and that we properly appreciate the nature and the benefits of seeing animals in their natural habitat. But we also want to make sure that we don't cause them any damage themselves as a result of our activity. So just going to seals, I don't know whether there are any more seals about at the moment or if they're just being talked about more, but there appears to be more human seal interactions at the moment. And coming back to that Instagram type mentality and people learning things about stuff on Facebook, I've seen an assessment of seals that they're the Labradors of the sea when they're actually wild animals. So how should paddleboarders behave when they're on the water? And how should they behave particularly around seals when they're, say, on the beach or on the rocks? Should they go for a closer look?
Yeah, I mean, a great question. So if we start at the shore and then go into the water, I guess makes sense. So on the shore, if you see a seal on the shoreline, it is likely resting. So seals haul out onto land to rest and digest their food. And therefore, if you see a seal on the shoreline, you should be as far away from it as you possibly can be. If a seal can see you, then you're too close. So if a seal's looking at you, then you're too close. So we kind of assess Instagram shots like that. So when you get an Instagram shot where somebody's got a seal looking straight down the lens of their camera and they think it's a great photograph, for us as marine mammal medics, that's kind of the worst possible photograph that you can have, because it basically means that seal was very aware that you were there. So you'll see organisations such as British Divers, Marine Life Rescue and Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust will seldom put photographs or never put photographs of seals looking straight down a camera lens online, because we don't want to promote that as okay. The exception to that rule will be potentially if we were taking a photograph of an animal that we were going to rescue. So if it was a seal pup and it happens to be that we're getting a shot of that seal pup to get its body condition just before we actually assessed, physically handled that animal and assessed it, then that might be different. But generally, we advise if you want to take photographs of seals in the wild, then you use a very, very long lens. If a seal happened to be looking in your direction, that you make it very, very clear that you are using a long lens so you don't encourage people to get too close to them. There's a big selfie culture around people wanting to get close to these charismatic animals. And we need to recognise that we're doing them harm by doing that. If you see a seal on land and it looks like it's in trouble, slightly different. That's certainly in the UK, the phone number to call would be British Divers, Marine Life Rescue. And again, give that animal space, encourage people to stay away from it, keep dogs on leads if people have got dogs with them, and call British Divers, Marine Life Rescue, and a medic will come out to assess what's going on with that seal. So it's slightly different if that animal looks like it's injured. And predominantly, that would be seal pups. And if you see a seal that's a tiny little white coat, which at this time of year in the UK, we will have lots and lots of babies because it's pupping season here. Again, really, really all the more important to keep as much distance as possible and call British Divers, Marine Life Rescue. If you go and handle that seal pup, when its mum comes back from feeding, will likely reject that seal pup because it'll have your smell on it. So quite often people think that they're helping, or they might pick up seal pups and attempt to put them back in the water. If a seal pup's on land, it's on land for a reason. It's not like, it's a mammal. It needs to be on the land to breathe, and it might be exhausted and having a rest. And you throwing it back in the water could be exactly what kills it because it doesn't have the power or energy to swim. So that's kind of the on land piece. And the same applies for nesting seabirds. So being really aware of where there are local nesting sites and being aware that you could be disturbing those sites simply by going out to enjoy that blue space. And in the water, seals may well approach you on a stand-up paddleboard in the water. And our advice is to not really engage with them. If a seal becomes too habituated with people, it will then get into trouble. It'll then associate people as friendly when people are actually a threat to marine wildlife. We have seals in Newquay Harbour and St Ives Harbour who have become so habituated to people, and people have even fed them. And what happens is those animals then approach boats and get hit by propellers on boats, or they get fishing hooks in their faces or in their bodies and come a cropper that way, or they can get caught up entangled in fishing nets because they haven't associated people with being not necessarily helpful for their health. So if seals approach you in the water, be calm, but it's not an opportunity for you to play with them. And they are charismatic and beautiful, and it can seem like this amazing encounter, and for that moment it might be brilliant for you, but you're not doing that animal any good in the long term because that animal will learn to approach people. They do investigate with their mouths. So again, seals have got very, very sharp teeth, and they do investigate with their mouths. So it's really possible that you can get an inadvertent bite from a seal, in which case you would need to go to have antibiotics for that. So you want to avoid that at all costs, really. So being aware of that and touching marine life. So touching seals, we had Nick, the dolphin, the social solitary dolphin or solitary social dolphin that came in and swam with a few people, and people were stroking him. And we gave out warnings that the chances are he would become too accustomed to being around people and get hit by a boat. And guess what? A couple of weeks later, he was hit by a propeller strike in Ireland. It's exactly what our posters had said, please leave this animal alone. But people couldn't resist his charisma. So we are not necessarily good for marine mammals in that way, and certainly not seeking out interactions with seals is not a good thing. If you stand up paddling around the coast and you see areas of haul out areas where there are seals hauled out on rocks, again, that's their rest space, and you're a threat to them if you're getting into that space. So you need to take yourself away from that area. If a seal pup is spooked when it's hauled out on high rocks, or a colony of seals is, what can happen is they can spook into the water. They'll move really quickly across the rocks, and they get injuries. They get cuts on their bodies from the rocks. You can have pups killed in stampedes. You can have pregnant mothers lose their pups and miscarry due to being spooked by people. So it's a really tricky subject for us as marine mammal medics, because we want people to enjoy the water. And as people get out on the water with new ways of exploring untapped areas, we need to be educated, and we need people to realise the potential impacts of doing that on our marine wildlife. So understanding, where these areas are to avoid, understanding about tides, understanding how and when seals haul out for rests, and being mindful of it being their space and sensitive times of year.
Well, I've certainly learned a huge amount from that. So what's your assessment of the number of seals out there? Because we've seen sightings up and down the Thames and in my local area, which hasn't necessarily happened before. Do you think that the numbers are on the increase? Do you think this is a result of climate change and their environments changing? Or have they always been there and we just haven't seen them?
So, I mean, I think we're just seeing more seals because people get out and about enjoying the space. We have common seals around the UK, lots and lots of common seals, and we have grey seals predominantly. Yeah, Cornwall has a lot of grey seals. The UK actually has 34% of the grey seal population, global population. So we think that grey seals are plentiful. Whereas actually we have 34% of the global population, and they're actually globally rare. So in the UK, we might think nothing of seeing a grey seal. Certainly in Cornwall, we might think that's a fairly commonplace to come across them. And yet we're really privileged to have such a high proportion of a globally rare species. So they certainly need protecting. So even though we might appear to be seeing more and more of them, they're a keystone part of our food chain, and they are a really good indicator of how healthy our ocean is, because we actually, when we're out rescuing them, we can see very clearly when they're exhausted, and if we're having lots of exhausted pups as a result of more and more storms, that's an indicator of climate change. The fact that these animals are having to adapt to us having more and more storms at a time of year that they are in their pupping season, when their pups are learning to be seals. Those pups only have 3 weeks with their mothers to learn how to be a seal, and then they're on their own in the world. And we've got these tiny pups fighting big waves as a result of us messing with the climate. We see net entanglements, which is an indicator of discarded ghost fishing net, which again, marine plastics impacting our wildlife. So they are great marine indicator species of the health of our oceans, and they need our protection because they're actually, most of the battles that they're fighting are the result of human intervention.
I know that you are on call for seal emergencies there, and you're having a really busy time at the moment. Just tell us about your daily duties and your obligations in terms of seals in your local area.
Yeah, will do. So I work for myself. I'm a Blue Health coach. As part of that, I've got a very, very strong thread of corporate social responsibility around looking after our ocean, and I don't see the two things as separate. I see it all about blue health. It's all about blue health and well-being for nature, and we're part of nature. So I do a lot of volunteering. I volunteer with Surfers Against Sewage. I volunteer with Ghost Net Busters, but actually British Divers Marine Life Rescue, I don't work for them. I'm a volunteer. They get around a third of my time. pro bono, and British Divers Marine Life Rescue is a charity, and it's predominantly run by volunteers. Pretty much most of the man and woman power is volunteer led, and we respond to marine mammals in distress. It's a bit like the Coast Guard for marine wildlife. So we are the first emergency service for marine wildlife in trouble on our shores. So that could be a whale gets washed in and stranded on a shoreline. It could be a dolphin. It could be a porpoise. So the cetaceans on our shoreline, and our medics, we're all on a call out system. A member of the public will call in that animal. Our medics will respond, and we will assess that animal and see if that animal is viable to be refloated with the help of a vet. If it is viable to be refloated, we'll administer first aid to the animal and get that animal back out into the ocean. And if it isn't, we'll take the steps to end that animal's suffering in a dignified and calm way through euthanasia and remove that animal from the ecosystem. And then we also respond predominantly to seals. So we have thousands of call-outs per year across the UK to seals in distress. And that can be for all sorts of reasons, as I've already mentioned. Again, it's a call-out system. You have a text goes off and it says there's a seal on this beach and it happens to be near you. Can you respond? And our medics turn up to respond to that pup. We've recently built our very first seal hospital in Cornwall. We have lots of different areas around the UK where medics have pups overnight at their homes, for example, administering first aid until they can go to larger rehabilitation centres. And this year we've opened a seal hospital here in Cornwall, which is the first purpose-built 10-pen hospital that British Divers have built. So that's quite exciting to have that facility. And that's to provide critical care once those animals have been rescued. Again, before they go to larger rehabilitation centres to be made fat and fit to get them back out. British Divers Marine Life Rescue are very focused on not keeping animals in captivity. So our aim is to encourage animals to thrive out in the wild.
So fat and fit, very much the watchword for seals. So there's some fantastic work going on there. And of course, we will link to that organisation and all the organisations that we mention here in the show notes. Just to finish off in terms of wildlife, you mentioned nesting birds. One thing that we tend to come across at various times of the year, certainly on the rivers, are swans. And swans are often seen as by paddle boarders as being aggressive, and I guess some are, but for a reason. And we had a situation on one of my local rivers, I think about a year ago, where some paddleboarders pushed a family of swans out of their particular territory. And as a result, it didn't end well at all for the cygnets of that family, who were attacked by another territorial swan a little bit upriver. So it's just generally about being really considerate about the wildlife who live in what area you're paddling. You're a guest there, but the idea is just to leave them completely undisturbed and avoid any form of interaction with them, because, as you say, you're just not helping them in the slightest, even if it happens to be quite a good picture for your Instagram.
Yeah, I totally agree. That idea of being a guest is a really good one to hold and sit in their perspective. Any animal that feels under threat is going to be defensive, and I prefer the word defensive than aggressive with swans or with seals. With a seal, if you push into its territory, you are likely to get bitten, and their bites are not pleasant. Similar with swans, they're going to be defensive, and the fact that people created that impact for that family of swans is, I would imagine, devastating for those people as well. I can't imagine that because it generally is inadvertently that we create this impact. So mostly people aren't deliberately causing displacement of wildlife, and you just don't want to be that person, and you don't want to have that sort of experience when you're out enjoying space.
And you mentioned about your other work, so Surfers Against Sewage, your regional representative. I know that you've been doing a huge amount of work in terms of reducing plastic use and a lot of beach clear-ups there, but obviously, the clue's in the title. It's a UK organisation that was set up for a particular reason. And as we speak, there's a rather disappointing legislation push through centrally about that. I know that there are huge numbers of the paddleboard community who are absolutely incensed, and we don't like to get political on this show, but please write to your MP. Just take us through that legislation that's recently been signed through.
So again, rather than getting too much into the legislation, Surfers Against Sewage was started by a group of surfers who wanted clean recreational water users. Now in the UK, it's legal to allow combined sewer outlets to basically pump out effluent into our ocean. So untreated effluent into our ocean, which is, for lots of countries, that would be absolutely horrific to even think about that. So there's an opportunity for legislation to stop that, and yet our government haven't supported that. So our government believes that it's okay for us to continue to pollute our water with untreated sewage, which is pretty disappointing for certainly approaching COP26. That you would imagine that would be something that in the year 2021, with the infrastructure that we have available to us and the levels of creativity and engineering at our disposal, that we would be able to be a little bit more progressive in our thoughts around how do we protect the ocean when it's so important for our collective health. So Surfers Against Sewage campaign at lots of different levels. As an organisation, we work with things like grassroots cleaning up the beach. So there's that very much remedial action of picking up marine plastics and microplastics on our beaches, through to lobbying for politicians to make policy changes to protect our ocean. And that's everything from sewage through to climate-related conversations, through to manufacturers of various different products, so encouraging low-impact products, through to championing circular economy around waste. So it's not really... It is currently very topical about sewage, but it's not really surface and sewage anymore. It's about how do we protect our ocean, and how therefore do we protect our collective health. And therefore there's lots of strands to it. I think lots of people for a while thought the Surfers Against Sewage were just about plastics, because there was the Plastic Free Communities campaign and single-use plastics. Yeah, it has a massive impact on so many different things that relate to climate change. But single-use plastics are very much a gateway conversation to talking about carbon, essentially. It's just that it's something very tangible that people can think about their use of single-use plastics. So it enables people to take that first step towards taking action to make collective difference. So, yeah, we're as a volunteer rep with Surfers Against Sewage, we're very much focused on what difference can each individual make, and sometimes we can look at climate change as something that's so big and vast that we can't do anything about that. And yet every single action that you take matters.
And it's this legislative focus which is so important, not to minimise any beach cleanups or anything like that, which is super, super important, to go up there and just remove all of those horrendous plastics wherever you find them. But it's all about feeding information back to organisations like Surfers Against Sewage or Planet Patrol, Lizzie Carr's organisation, where you can measure the brands and that are causing this level of pollution and influence that change at a high level.
Yeah, we do brand audits as well. So when we're out on the beach, we do brand audits, and it's the same villains that you see come up over and over again. So encouraging brands to think about what they're giving their consumers, so if their consumers then act irresponsibly, there can be less of an impact. Because quite often we like to target and focus different parts of the globe and say, oh, well, the issue is in this part of the globe, and look at their trash. It's like, well, actually, there has to be responsibility about the people who are pumping plastic into environments that just don't have the infrastructure to be able to cope with it. So it's around, it's that top down and bottom up approach. A good friend of mine, Steve Wilson, who's part of the Story of Stuff. That's a great link as well to look at in terms of having a look at their work. Steve's over in Berkeley. Have a look at the Story of Stuff if you want to gain more understanding of the wider circular economy.
Links in the show notes. And then just finally, ghost net busters. Could you just explain a little bit about ghost nets and your efforts to help address that problem?
Yeah, happy to. So we have on Perranporth Beach, based on the Atlantic drift, we have an end of Perranporth Beach, which is Penhale Sands, that tends to collect a lot of marine litter from all over the globe. So you can actually see where it lands, this litter, and track where things come from. And over the last few years, we were getting very, very large ghost fishing nets. So fishing nets that are huge trawl nets that have been either abandoned, lost, discarded. For some reason, they've ended up in the ocean, not attached to a boat, and therefore drifting and catching marine wildlife whilst they do that, because they continue to fish even if they're not attached to a boat, and ending up on our shoreline. So we were recovering those, and for a while we didn't really have anything to do with them. So we would pick them up, these nets that might be 1/2 to 3/4 of a ton, huge nets we're talking about here, and they would then end up going to landfill, which was one step better than having them drifting around in the ocean catching marine life unnecessarily, but it wasn't a great solution. And then we came across our friends Odyssey Innovation. So again, that's a great link to put into the show notes. And Rob Thompson at Odyssey Innovation actually was a pioneer of recycling ghost fishing net. So he was actually one of the founders of the Ocean Recovery Project. He now has got the Marine Net Recovery Scheme and the basic Ocean Recovery Project. And he has a scheme through Exeter City Council, so it's quite southwest based, but he is looking to expand that more across the UK, where we as ghost net busters go out similarly to the SEAL call out system. We have volunteers across the whole of Devon and Cornwall, all in different regions or areas. And if a ghost fishing net gets called in to us on our shore, we can get our volunteers out there to recover it. And that net gets recovered, it gets put into an Odyssey Innovation skip. So we have a collection system, and a guy called Matt Holland, who's part of Exeter City Council, they will collect those ghost fishing nets, and those ghost fishing nets come back into a system where we close the loop, and basically that net gets shredded and made into pellet to then be made into products such as, or all sorts of products, so people can then buy plastic pellet that is from marine recycled net. Important to note, lots of different organisations do buy this pellet, and that's really amazing when they can promote their products as marine recycled plastic. What's great about Odyssey Innovation is they're actually the guys that do all the hard graft and do all the work around getting it to that stage. So we're volunteers as ghost net busters. We get the ghost net in, and then Rob and his team are actually the guys that do the hard part around how do you turn that net into pellet. And Rob creates what Rob creates is Rob creates these ocean recycled hand planes. So the plastic can come back into being used for recreational activity, and that brings in funds to help him continue the work that he does around recycling. And he also makes marine recycled kayaks, and he gifts a lot of those to marine conservation groups to go out and do paddle for plastic. So as an organisation, Odyssey Innovation are hugely focused on encouraging sustainability when it comes to championing the circular economy.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know our episode sponsors, Starboard, also use discarded nets. I believe they're working to a similar scheme in order to integrate that into their products as well. So it is very heartening that there are these innovators out there looking at ways to process this waste and to repurpose it. Incredible. And, just in terms of the positive sides of the story, one reason why the environmental focus has been such a theme in this show all the way through, actually, is that people's experience on paddleboards has really connected them to that environment, because if you were just walking by the river, you wouldn't necessarily see all of the detritus and the waste and all the horrendous stuff that gets cast up there. So it really has sparked an interest in beach cleanups, in river cleanups, and environmental action, which is really heartening. And that kind of brings us a little bit into the next section of the show, because clearly this is a show of two halves about blue minds. And one of the things that Wallace J. Nichol in his book Blue Mind talked about is that exposure to water does help to make you become a water warrior, and that leads to greater concern about the water environment. I know you've been very much inspired by his work and Blue Mind, quite apart from your own personal experience of the water. And as a coach, you use the ocean environment to help your clients achieve changes in their lives through a program of Blue Health. And I know that you obviously do that where you are in Cornwall. You've also done that in California. And at the moment, I guess you do that quite a lot virtually as well. Could you just explain a little bit about how you got to that situation of being an ocean personal coach?
So I describe myself as an ocean advocate, even though a lot of what I do is ocean activism as well. And ocean advocacy is around using every single opportunity to champion and protect our ocean. So I started coaching full-time at the beach back in 2009. And that was predominantly because I set up my coaching business here in Cornwall at that time. And I was more intuitively aware of the fact that time around the ocean did me good. And therefore, I wanted to encourage other people to experience that. I got heavily into environmental psychology. So at that point in time, it wasn't called Blue Health. It was literally the very early stages of exploring how might nature and nature connectedness help us. So I got quite heavily into that back in 2009 and was coaching at the beach, taking people on coaching adventures. And at that point in time, taking things like various different modalities, coaching modalities such as NLP and spiral dynamics and various psychometrics that I'd learned from the corporate world, and working with clients out on the beach, exploring their life and what was important to them in that environment. And it started to evolve really quickly into conversations that were more about storytelling and life and the universe and everything on it, more drawing on things from the world of philosophy and personal narratives. And as a professional coach, so I trained as a professional coach back then too. I was bringing in things from all different areas of my life. So I'd worked with animal rescue with dogs with control orders and exploring behavioral modeling, which, yes, links with NLP, but also it's just about using our senses to observe shifts in behavior and shifts in energy and work with people from an energetic and resonance perspective. So I was bringing in those sorts of modalities. I trained as a yoga teacher, so brought in a load around how are we breathing in this space and what's that doing for us. I free dived, so didn't even mention free diving. I free dived, so breath, how we work with our breath and connection and heart rhythm, that side of things became important. And so I was coach Jay. I'm good friends with Jay, author of Blue Mind. Jay says, you were doing Blue Mind before it was called Blue Mind. It's like, well, yes, and I absolutely love Jay's work and I love his book, and it's a way of. Jay champions the ocean, and he's a huge mentor, and I'm a huge advocate of his work. And essentially, he brought great language to what it is that we're experiencing when we're on the coast or in water. Full stop, because Jay champions water in all its forms, as do we all, because we know the ocean starts at the stream. So I was coaching from 2009 and evolving a coaching practice that was something different from A to B coaching. It was it's definitely become more about emergent coaching, more about how do we show up daily, how do we recognize the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, our behavior and nature, and see nature as part of us rather than something separate to us. I don't use the term the beach is a resource. I don't talk about using water to work as a coach. Work with water is very much a partnership. And the environments and nature around is really, I'm in partnership and we work together. We're part of this ecosystem. Got heavily into ecocentrism. So, how do we ask questions from that space of thinking rather than this anthropocentric space that we tend to live our lives where we think we're at the top of the tree and everything else is in service of us. I met Jay back in 2014. So I'd already been coaching at the beach for five years by that time. Our ideals, they align as friends, as with lots of members of the Blue Mind community. So I champion his work. I champion things like 100 Days of Blue, which is a mechanism for encouraging people to get out and connect with water in a way that inspires others to do the same. You hear we have groups like the Blue Tits, which is a group down in Cornwall, which is, I think they're now all the way across the UK. I think it started in Wales, where they talk about their experiences in water, and they say, oh yeah, it's great. And they start to get excited and interested in the psychology of that. They start to get interested in the social elements of that. And it's lovely because I don't need to say to them, oh yes, what you're experiencing is, because they're experiencing it in a very organic way, and they're just living and breathing blue mind or blue health without necessarily even needing to place a label on it. But I do talk about it because it's a big part of my work. But in those social situations, it's just great to see people very organically experience that state of that meditative, lightly meditative state of connection, and experience all around all the elements of awe and wonder that come with that, and how that impacts the way that we can think creatively. So I've been blue health coaching now for a long time now, and it evolves and more science comes out. More books come out, different perspectives come out, and we have hugely profound insights out on the coast that space facilitates, and the coast holds space for us to explore being more fluid in the way that we show up. And I did a master's during that time around ambiguity and fluidity. So exploring how do we experience non-certainty as human becomings, and that was all around spending time in the littoral zone, so in that space between land and sea, where everything is continually shifting. So recognizing that fluidity within us, and how do we encourage ourselves to show up with a little bit more fluidity in a world that's continually changing. That was a long answer, wasn't it?
Lots of comments to come out of that. I think just for your last point, obviously the sea and the beach is a metaphor. If there's one thing that we can be sure about, things change, and a lot of people are resistant to change. So I expect that the sea and the beach environment would provide a perfect metaphor for people moving, circumstances. And there's been a lot of changes. I mean, there's always changes, but, particularly over the last few years, people have become very, very aware of how things can very, very quickly change. And obviously the aspect of mental health, because Nichols articulated it in a brilliant way, and brought it alive for us. And all of the conversations that I have on this show have, to one extent or another, involved those sorts of conversations. From an episode a couple of weeks ago with Dave Knight, who has anxiety issues and has just completed his 365 days of paddling on consecutive days, and talking about mental health. And also Mike Tipton, who is hardcore scientist, who provided the guidelines, a lot of the guidelines for the RNLI and GB Life-Saving Rescue and loads of other organisations as well. And what Mike Tipton said in his show is that you tend to do a lot of the science around the bad things that happen, but not necessarily the good things. And I'm very pleased to see some science starting to trickle out around the benefits of cold water swimming or cold water immersion and breath work and all of this sort of stuff, which I guess the yogis knew back in the day and went to because it helped them, but which we're only starting to really focus on now. Completely agree. And neuroscience around us being more embodied in our decision making is hugely powerful around that. Certainly the physical aspect of things like cold water immersion. So really being able to connect with your entire nervous system when it comes to making decisions, which then can encourage you to make wiser choices about your actions in the world, and therefore question the impact of those actions. So tell us about some of the sort of coaching that you do with people. And obviously I don't expect you to name names, but if you could just give us an example of some of the changes that you've seen in people who you've engaged with through your Blue Health coaching.
Yeah, so predominantly I work with people that don't perceive themselves as broken. So although all of us have got sketchy things within our worlds, that when you're having deep conversations, those sorts of things can bubble to the top. But I work with people that either run businesses and they just don't feel excited about what's happening for them in the world. They've become maybe a bit cynical. They've become maybe a bit blinkered in their worldview, where materialism can kick in, and that they want more of that broader perspective to feel a little bit more alive day to day. So I have people that I've worked with a lot of people that run businesses like that. They on the surface look successful, but they're just not feeling it. Or their goals, all of their goals have seemed to be things that are very personal goals, but about personal attainment versus what has a wider impact in the world. So tend to work with individuals that end up being a lot more aware of their corporate social responsibility. And I don't really like that term, but I use it because it's a term that's recognised by people. But their responsibility, or being advocates for the planet, or being really aware of setting goals that are more than that refer to more than 100 years. So mainly the guys that I work with, it's about extending your timeline so that you recognize that the impact of the choices that you're making right now go beyond your grandchildren. If you're going to have grandchildren, we tend to think very much in terms of as far back as our grandparents and possibly as far forward as our grandchildren. We don't really think about deep time and the fact that we're not here for that long, and therefore there are implications to every choice we make. So that can be organizations thinking about the sustainability. That could be individuals thinking about their life choices. That can be everything from people wanting to move to another country to work for humanitarian organizations, having come out of a corporate role, or it can be people going through significant life changes around their health, for example. So it is hugely broad. I work with a lot of people who work in media, so a lot of guys who make like nature films, so they're already pretty nature connected, which is possibly why they gravitate to coming to spend time at the beach. And I work a lot with referrals, so you end up with pockets coming from different kind of fields, professional fields, and nature filmmakers. I've had a lot of those recently. I went through a phase of working with a lot of solicitors, which was fascinating because their world was so different from mine. But you have one or two people that come to the beach and have that experience of, I do everything from hour and a half sessions at the beach through to, we do a coastal coaching adventure, which is a day at the coast where we walk along the coast. We start at one point of the coast and we walk to another point of the coast, around 10 miles through 3 or 4 different beaches that have got a lot of different landscape characteristics and different wildlife that they may well come across from a distance. And we work on things that you might work with as an NLP professional, because I know that you're NLP literate, so things like limiting beliefs, those types of things, but more so from a existential stance in terms of the why on earth are we here in the first place, and what does it mean to be purposeful, and what is your relationship with not knowing the answer to everything, and how does that impact your ability to move forward. So the questions that get asked out on the coast are slightly different, quite different from your traditional coaching conversation, where you might say, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what are the steps in between? And it can be more structured and formulaic, whereas we tend to be walking, but certainly not pedestrian in our conversations. My friend Julie Stark, who's actually also a friend of Jay, gave me a great quote. I always attribute to her because it's, rather than just steal it, which is go deep or go home. And that's the conversations that's the conversations that we have on the coast. I'm not. There's lots and lots of coaches that can work with much more of that surface level stuff around immediacy and attainment, whereas the conversations that we have out on the coast are much more about being socially equitable and thinking about us being simply an interesting species on a planet and part of that ecosystem rather than separate to it. So, and that impacts people's, yes, we then do some fundamental business planning as and when that is appropriate. And yes, it's sometimes appropriate to do some performance coaching, but essentially the conversations are about alignment within yourself. As a multiple brain integration techniques coach as well, heart, head and gut alignment are hugely important within that. but also that level of connection and alignment also needs to flow through you and beyond you out into the environment. So we talk about alignment with the space and place that we're within. So it's a blend of human geography, environmental psychology, coaching, various different coaching modalities within that. Yoga showing up in an aligned way. So they're quite deep conversations.
As I have this conversation, I'm very aware of the metaphors that I use, and I was going to describe that work on the beach as being a full immersion, which probably it isn't quite. But yeah, absolutely going deep. And it just provides that level of reflection, which is an additional piece of leverage for people to consider where they are in the world, and obviously consider the beach as that incredible metaphor of transition.
Yeah, and we as Blue Health coaches. So I train Blue Health coaches. So with various different approaches that we might draw from when it comes to working with people on the coast, but actually recognizing that pretty much everything that you need in terms of promoting insight and awareness is already there for you when you're out on the coast. So as part of Blue Health coaching, it's enabling and encouraging coaches to be able to actually see that. So beyond use of metaphor, really, really connecting with that space. So that space becomes a part of the conversation rather than a backdrop to it.
And then just to talk a little bit more about Jay and the conversations and the communication he has made in terms of Blue Mind. We talked a little bit about the neuroscience of it. There is some clear evidence that's coming through that exposure to the sea and the coast and to sports and so on does make a clear difference to, anxiety levels, your parasympathetic nervous system, and basically calms things down. And probably one of the most recent example of that I've seen out there is the management of PTSD, particularly amongst veterans. And there are a lot of very scarred people coming out of recent conflicts. There's a fantastic documentary on Netflix at the moment called Resurface, which is all about rehabilitating a lot of these veterans who are in a really, really bad way and connecting them to the water. So, it does have a very, very fundamental effect on even some quite significant psychological difficulties, doesn't it?
Certainly, yeah. And Jim Ritterhoff, who's part of Force Blue, is another good friend and part of our Blue Mind community. So it's a great film. Put the link in, Resurface, and have a look at Force Blue. So the work that Force Blue have done with vets, and there are lots of different schemes around encouraging people to connect with water for things like anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and simply just wider mental health benefits. So Jay's work, Blue Mind, it's not just the book. So the Blue Mind groundswell, as he likes to call it, the aim is to decentralize Blue Mind, so it's not specifically about Jay or any of the core guys who were there in the early days. It's about Blue Mind being for everybody. And Blue Mind being a term or a term that everybody acknowledges and recognizes. Oh, that's that feeling that I get when I'm in, near, on, or underwater. And then the ripple effect of that encourages people to go out there and experience that so that they gain all those health benefits, but also so that they love that space and give back to and protect that space. So that it's very much about that symbiotic relationship. And the Blue Mind, he wrote the book. We had lots and lots of different summits over the years where different people from different avenues of life came together. So we had poets and musicians and scientists and educators and coaches and physical trainers and techie people who loved water. The common denominator being individuals who absolutely loved and connected with water and wanted to explore what on earth is going on for us when it comes to our connection with water, and how do we encourage more and more and more people to be aware of this and have access to it, so that Blue Mind is common knowledge. And whether you use the term Blue Mind or not, we talked about that earlier, connecting with water being good for us and us protecting that water is common knowledge. And that's very much the aim of Jay's work as an advocate for water. And that's in all different fields. So that's, whether that's in tourism or real estate or hard business, the corporate world through to the recreational world. There's lots of different avenues for blue health and blue mind to be relevant. And we believe as a collective or as a groundswell that is very possible. It's very possible to encourage more and more people to be able to access healthy wild waters, and that it's really important for people to access it, those who really need it to be able to access it as well. And that's, I think, where things like the post-traumatic stress disorder, guys with the vets, you've got Bobby Lane, Bobby Lane, I think he's in the film Resurface. He's another good friend. He's currently studying NLP as well, is Bobby. And he's getting some of the structures now behind what actually he's been experiencing, which is really cool, because he's another person who's experienced those benefits very organically. And then we have conversations about the NLP elements of it that he's now learning about, and he's like, oh, that's what that is, and that makes him even more fascinated. It doesn't dilute, just because you explain the magic, it doesn't dilute the magic. It just gives you some structure behind what's actually happening for you when you are in this blue space. And it's great that the science is backing up that there's very tangible impact on our brain. And I definitely refer to the brain as our nervous system, not the brain being something that is above our neck. We actually had a guy called Nick Sarve came to one of the Blue Mind summits. Where was he? That was out in DC, that one. And he was talking about decision science and parts of the brain and how they fire up at different times. And we had a great chat around the wider neuroscience of the heart and the gut, and how we have neurons throughout our whole nervous system. And I thought he'd as a neuroscientist, proper scientist. I thought he'd be like, oh yeah, right. Well, that's a load of rubbish, isn't it? And he was, fair play to him. He said, I completely concur that we have the ability to process information throughout the whole of our nervous system through neurons that are dispersed. He said, as a neuroscientist, I work with an extremely tiny part of the brain. You have to zone in so specifically. He said that actually being mindful of the interconnections between the whole of your nervous system, of course, every aspect of your nervous system is going to impact on how you show up. And when we're near and in and around water, we know that our entire nervous system is operating in a very different way. And for me at the coast, people who have anxiety, they hold their body in a different way, they breathe in a different way, even without getting in the water. As soon as you move on sand, you walk in a different way. Your vestibular system's working in a different way. You have a different sense of proprioception. Put that onto a stand-up paddleboard. You're balancing in a different way. Your whole body is operating in a different way, and therefore the way that you process emotion is going to automatically be shifted as a result of that. And that then facilitates conversations that flow very differently.
And you combine that with social contact, with maybe a bit of cold water and exposure to nature. And that's a quite incredible stack of benefits. And I think anyone listening has an intuitive understanding of the benefits in the water and the ocean. I guess they wouldn't be on a stand-up paddleboard otherwise. But
for sure.
Lizzi, I really appreciate your time and taking us through those two fascinating areas of study. And really, they're more interconnected than you would think at first glance, aren't they?
They're completely interconnected because it's an ecosystem. If I don't advocate for the ocean, the ocean definitely advocates for me. So why would I not advocate for it?
So, Lizzi, thanks so much for talking and sharing your knowledge. Where can we find out more about you?
So my website is goingcoastal.blue, and on Instagram I'm Lizzi_L. Or Going Coastal Blue. You can find either of those. If you want to find out about British Divers Marine Life Rescue, they're on Instagram, Facebook, various different avenues to find out about them. They're really close to my heart. Surfers Against Suicide, various different links that you're going to put on anyway. And if you want to find out about becoming a Blue Health coach, if you're a stand-up paddler, they fit really well. I've currently trained quite a lot of stand-up paddlers, which is great because those people already are connected with the ocean. And it's more about how do you elegantly bring bring that science into practical domain where you can actually work with people to help them feel more connected and more aligned.
Elegancy is the key. Well done on all your great work, and thanks again for joining us on the show. And hopefully at some point we'll catch up on, in, or even under the water. Thanks so much, Lizzi.
That'd be great. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that chat with Lizzi. And please don't forget to check out the show notes for the links referred to in the episode. We're approaching the end of this season, and if you subscribe to our newsletter, we can keep you up to date with our bonus episodes and our timelines for the next season, which is coming next year. The SUP FM podcast is produced to connect, inform and inspire the SUP tribe. And as you're a member of that tribe, I wanted to thank you again for listening to the show. And it is a privilege to continue to share these stories with you, to chat to all of my awesome guests, and to share this love of our sport. So until next week, I'll see you on the water.